So it's very interesting, and I think the family justice movement, centre movement, is a very interesting new way to think about how we organise our services. I suppose I'm coming with a critique, because while I like really a lot of what has been said, and the passion and the energy, I'm fearful in the ACES debate that we lose sight of poverty and structural inequalities in the dialogue. And I understand as well, in America, you have a very different political system and a very different economic system to us. And I suppose I really am conscious that we don't lose sight of how these things interface, and that the role that socioeconomic and structural disadvantage has, both in predicating adversity and exacerbating adversity, a whole range, and the interlinks of how these things interact. So, I just wonder, I know there's work in America in terms of building community resilience, and the really good work that guys called Ellis and Dietz did about the other pair of ACEs, adverse community environments. And I like, Chan, that you mentioned about, that the ACE question as was originally designed does not address it. Like, it looks very, very particularly at household, they call it dysfunction, but I think that recently it's been critiqued, and household challenges maybe more, and thinking that mental illness is not always adverse as well. There's lots of parents with mental illness who do a very good job. So I just think we need to be, I suppose I'm interested in a more critical dialogue, and I think if we go the individual route, you teach people hope, and I get it. I'm a therapist. I think hope works. I think it's really, really important because we're individual human beings, but at the same time,
Can I put the question, maybe start with Chan, who's done some research, can maybe answer categorically, and then certainly Casey and/or Gail, which of you want to take?
I think it lets government off the hook in terms of looking at bigger policy structural issues.
So the way that I think about, and we're starting to do some of that work on some of these larger social issues like poverty or racism or oppression, is that those are specific barriers to pathways. And so that hope is still the context of goals, pathway, and willpower. The question is, what pathways are available to people? And that is certainly influenced by social economic status, the resources that one has. So, for instance, is hope for me the same as it is for the homeless youth in Belfast? And the answer to that is it is. It's goals, pathway, and willpower. But I have access to resources that are different than the homeless youth. And so they certainly influence that. But what I will say is I don't want us to go the opposite direction of your fear and say that social economic status restricts hope, because it doesn't. It restricts resources and pathways.
Just to quickly address that too, is we're run by the District Attorney's Office in Alameda County, so we are government, first of all, and we run a women's empowerment program, which is really focused about employing the women. But as your point regarding policy, receiving feedback from these clients will then shape policy, which is drafted and proposed to legislators. And we do this every year in the cycle, that actually asks the legislation to rework policies in order to make sure that they are creating a stronger safety net and creating financial stability for our families. And so it's a wonderful conversation, and the only way to really have that lively, vibrant, worthwhile conversation is to get all these partners into the same building, bring these clients in, and then start that soup where everybody is interacting and communicating, and then have the decision makers and the policy makers and the legislatures witness it, hear these clients, hear the people who are working with these clients. And so it's really a conversation. And we have been very intensive this morning around emotional and well-being and testing. But my talk later this afternoon on our empowerment program really dives a little bit more deeply in jobs, employment, and this policy issue.
Historic oppression and racism and poverty and community violence are all force multipliers in the world of childhood trauma. So I grew up with white male privilege. I grew up in an environment, even though I grew up very poor, but I grew up in a family where I didn't have some of the same disparate impacts that communities of color would in the United States, or that communities that have suffered a generational historic oppression would. But in the Family Justice Center framework, we are not giving the government a pass. This is a public safety and a public health initiative. This is about the responsibility of government. And I will say that when we started this, kind of the progressives in the United States said, well, George Bush gave you the first $20 million. So when Barack Obama becomes president, the Family Justice Center movement is over. I mean, there's no way that a progressive Democrat will support what a somewhat regressive Republican was supporting in the United States in the political environment. And when Barack Obama got elected, we got more support. We got far more support from the government because Eric Holder, the Attorney General of the United States, said, we've got to focus on defending childhood, and we've got to focus on the relationship between poverty and community violence and racism and historic oppression and adverse childhood experiences. And they weren't measuring hope in any of the defending childhood work. They should have been. They were only talking about trying to somehow increase resiliency, the bounce back from all the bad things happening to people. But I will say that the Obama administration gave us even more support than the Bush administration because they understood the intersectionality issues that I think you're raising that are complex. But when we see a Family Justice Center community fail in the United States, it's because a voluntary organization or a non-governmental organization gets partners together and says, we're going to create a collaborative, and the government says, good luck to you. We support you. We're not going to give you any money. We're not going to change the way we do business. We're just going to cheer for you. And that's a worthless endeavor if it's going to try to change society, because the government has to rethink how it does its job, because the government silos too. Every ministry silos, every department silos. Everybody works in silos. So when we go into a community now in the United States, we say to the local government, you need to be willing to rethink everything you do so that 20 years from now, you're engaged in a public-private partnership between the private sector and the public sector. And when we see a center do well, whether it's a center like Alameda or it's Milwaukee, they're doing well because the government and the non-government agencies have joined themselves together in all of that. And I will say that in our year-round mentoring program, it's not just camping. We have kids doing activities, science, technology, engineering, arts, and math all year long in our year-round program called Pathways that's part of Camp Hope that Chan has been studying. We said to the kids, these are kids that most of whom don't have a parent who's gone to a university or graduated from college. And we said, we want you to go to either a vocational school or to be able to go to college when you get out of high school. And we weren't sure what was going to happen with that. And we just passed our 4-year mark. We have a 100% college enrollment rate. You want to talk about changing things. These are kids who don't have a family member that ever graduated from college that are now becoming doctors and lawyers and engineers because they found hope. And when hope went up, their school performance went up, and they became competitive in universities. So I do think it's about justice. That is changing the conditions that caused injustice. And education becomes part of that pathway, but we've got to get hope up in their life first and help them contextualize the trauma they've experienced, because otherwise they can't find higher hope in their life.
And I think what's become clear this morning is that if this is done properly, nobody is let off the hook. That's the very point of it. Everyone collects together for the common goal. And I can absolutely assure you that Marie is never going to let anyone off the hook, particularly government departments.
So, Allison, that's the point I wanted to make. It's just I feel like when we started the Family Justice Center, it became the process more transparent. Because I think when we were in silos, it was easy to sort of hide behind those silos. And I think there was more accountability to each other, where we would call each other out if something wasn't being done right, and more accountability to survivors because they were part of the process.
Well, and I'll give you an example. We didn't have gay and lesbian identified staff in the San Diego Family Justice Center when we opened. But when we invited the LGBTQIA plus community to come to us, they said, you don't look like us, you don't share our values. You need gay and lesbian identified staff in your center if you're going to meet the needs of our community. That was an accountability for me as the public prosecutor. And so we said, please come. And once we had gay and lesbian identified staff, we had these marginalized communities and the trans community and others that were invisible. They were invisible to the government. They were invisible to social service organizations. And suddenly, by having those staff, I became more accountable as a public official. And once the community joined us, they had more power. They had literally more power to make social change once they were part of our collaborative than when they'd been left out. And we did initially leave them out because it wasn't part of my job as a prosecutor until they said, we want to be at the table and we want to be part of your community. And it created social change.
You've got a hand down at the back.
Hi, Deirdre Mahan, Director of Women and Children's in the Western Trust. I just want to say, first of all, your presentations were very inspirational, and thank you. My question is, we've been doing a lot of work in Northern Ireland to try and encourage our communities to be trauma-informed, and that's a process that's ongoing. But I was very struck, both in talking to you last night and today, to think about how now we translate that into hope and how we become hope-informed communities. And I wondered if you had any tips or ideas, or what is it that we need to do next to take this to the next level?
Take that first.
So we're actually working in Thurston County, Washington. If you Google a term, Hope Thurston, they've decided to become a hope-informed community. And so we just finished a community-wide hope assessment, county-wide. And we're able to geocode that data. Basically what that means is I can get public health data, and what we found is that higher hope scores are associated with higher life expectancy. So what I'll point out is that higher A scores are associated with lower life expectancy. Higher hope scores are associated with higher life expectancy, so there's a connection there. But they've developed a collective impact model whereby community leaders have come together, and they will take on 8 initiatives using the framework of HOPE, goals, pathways, and agency, or willpower. So we're doing community-based work now as well.
I will add 2 points to sort of how we're trying to do that. Obviously, we changed our name, which is one. We used to call ourselves the National Family Justice Center Alliance. So what we did is we changed our name from the National Family Justice Center Alliance to Alliance for Hope. So this is who we're going to be. And I will just give you a small example of our own organization. We are challenging everyone in our organization to define what does a hope-centered organization look like. And then we're also challenging all of the FJC directors to do the same. But to come back to our definition of it, we don't know what that is, but we are stealing Chan to come work with us for your sabbatical. We've also hired a director for Hope to help us stay focused. We're taking our Hope scores every single year. We're reading the Casey's and Chan's book, Hope Rising Together. We are challenging ourselves, how do we increase our own hope scores so we can continue to give hope to others? And as you already heard, we've already started to take the hope scores of survivors at family justice centers. And that's just a little piece, but I think what it is, it comes back to each and every one of us. It comes back to our community. What does that look like for our organization? What does that look like for your Foyle FJC as you go forward? And I'm sure Casey's got lots of great ideas.
Well, I think this challenge to start saying, are you measuring hope in your own organizations, is a great start. Chan challenged us, and we weren't measuring hope in our own staff. How do I know if working for us increases your hope or decreases your hope? If you're working in an organization where you work and it causes your hope score to go down, that organization needs to change what it's doing, because it's not a hope-centered organization. When you work in an organization, it should be increasing hope in your life, not just in the lives of the people you serve, but your life. And if hope's not going up, your organization needs to change what you're doing. And so we're now challenging every employer in America. You should be measuring hope in your employees. So it turns out a high hope individual in the workplace can do in 7 hours what it takes a lower hope individual to do in 8 hours. So you can see the higher your hope score goes, the more effective you are at work. So when we interview new employees now, we take everybody's hope score before I offer them a job. I want to know if they're high hope or low hope. It doesn't mean I'm not going to hire a person that struggles with low hope, but it means that if I do hire them, they're going to have a plan for how to increase hope in their life. Because if I hire a low hope employee and they never go up in hope, they're not going to be able to give hope to others. So we have to be about the business of increasing hope in people's lives. So I think we not only have to challenge our people to do it to help others find hope, we have to have hope in our own lives. I think that should be a public policy position. Chan just got the elected district attorney of Thurston County, Washington, to decide to measure hope in his entire staff, to challenge his own organization. Am I increasing or decreasing hope in the people that work for me?
So I think we've got time for one quick question. Monica?
How much have you been able to influence the media with this concept? I'm thinking of your Jeremy Kyle here and Springer in the United States that has led to so much of the victim blaming. We've had a real challenge in confronting some of that, not just in the UK, but we've got our own talk shows here, and they're certainly not Oprah. And then we have to confront so much of this victim blaming, this individualistic approach, as opposed to a hopeful approach.
Well, Michelle Obama just did a book tour, and she had Ellen DeGeneres and Oprah Winfrey endorsing her book. Chan and I have written a book on hope, and our book tour is kind of like their book tour. Chan and I travel, and we sell a book here and there, and we get a news story here and there. But we are trying to raise that element. We have been promoting it. Laura Logan at 60 Minutes is working on a special right now with National Geographic on hope for us. We've been trying to get spokespeople in the media. Stephen Murphy's brother right there, Chris, is a anchor on a local news television station in San Diego, and we're hoping for Chris to partner with us to raise this issue. But it's a challenge. Hope is a challenge to get news on because it's not victim blaming, it's not juicy, it's not gory, it's not bloody. It's when hope rises, good things happen in people's lives, and that's not a good news story. So it's a challenge for us. If we could get Ellen DeGeneres to get interested in the concept of hope, I will say Ellen just hosted Emeka Naka, who is in our book. He's one of Chan's students, graduate students. He was just on Ellen DeGeneres for the second time talking about hope in his life. So she is actually starting to talk about it. Yeah.
We take your Oprah and your Ellen, and we match you with our Stephen Nolan. Biggest show in our country.
Oh my gosh.
And sometimes a hope vacuum. So I think Monica's absolutely right. More needs to be done, because you tune in sometimes and wonder where on earth society is going, and that isn't a good reflection, I don't think, of most people in society.
We just had a recent election in Alameda County. Our district attorney, Nancy O'Malley, who I put the picture up, she was running for re-election, and the Family Justice Center became a very important conversation in that election. And of course, that was very strongly media, especially local media. There was a really strong conversation. It was a back and forth regarding it was a contested election. And the person running against my boss, Nancy O'Malley, she said that she would not prosecute misdemeanor domestic violence cases. She wouldn't prosecute them. And it became a very, very, first of all, it's a very controversial statement, but it caught news fire, and it just elevated the conversation around domestic violence. And then we had the infrastructure, because of the Family Justice Center, in order to elevate that conversation and find experts, find clients who were willing to be able to go up in front of the camera and have a really meaningful conversation around domestic violence. And so consolidating and cohabitating resources around that, and especially having government involved, really, really helped with that conversation. And the media was involved, and the good media people are going to report appropriately on it.
We were hoping to have more media here today, but unfortunately, in the category of low hope, our president is here right now. So I think he probably drew the media away. But perhaps one day we'll have someone that will draw the media back to hope.